He said he was just helping Grandpa with the paperwork. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign showed up at the gate, and our family's century-old farm was suddenly on the market. Grandpa stood on the porch, confused and trembling, whispering, "I never signed anything." But Uncle Marvin just smiled and said, "It's mine now." And just like that, our legacy was vanishing acre by acre, but Caleb wasn't about to let that happen. If someone tried to erase your family's name from its own land, what would you do? If this story stirs something in you, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful family revenge stories. My name is Caleb Warren, and if there's one thing I know for sure, it's that some people don't deserve to carry the family name. I was raised on a piece of land that didn't just grow crops, it grew character. 5 generations of Warrens had worked that soil, and the man who taught me everything I know about grit and decency was my grandfather, Walter. Grandpa wasn't flashy. He wore the same denim overalls for decades, had hands like tree bark, and a stare that could calm a storm or cut through lies. He was a man of quiet integrity, of rituals and responsibility. He woke before dawn every day of his life, walked the fence lines, and treated every inch of that farm like a living thing that needed tending. But more than that, he believed in legacy, in leaving something behind that mattered. When my parents divorced, I was 10. Mom moved to Tennessee. Dad spiraled a bit, and suddenly I was dropped off at Grandpa's farm for the summer. That summer turned into 10 years. I didn't mind. Grandpa and I got along better than anyone else in the world. He didn't coddle me, but he gave me a sense of purpose. Fixing engines, feeding livestock, planting, harvesting. He taught me all of it. When I was 16, he took me out to the old shed and showed me a framed deed nailed to the wall. "Great-great-granddad signed this in 1903, he said. "This land stays in the family. Always." That moment stuck to my ribs like cornbread and beans. I carried it with me everywhere, even after I left for college, even when I moved to the city for work. I always came back to visit. The porch light was always on, the coffee always bitter, and the stories always better the second time around. But like everything in life, time crept in. By the time I was 30, Grandpa had slowed down. His hands still moved with muscle memory, but his body lagged behind. The stairs took longer. The mornings came later. I offered to move back full-time, but he'd say, "You got your life to live. I've got mine to finish." Enter Marvin, my father's older brother, my uncle, a man who had long ago distanced himself from farm life. Marvin was always the type to wear loafers in a field and complain about the smell. He lived 2 counties over in a brick house with a clean garage and sterile silence. He didn't come around much, holidays, maybe a funeral. But when Grandpa started showing signs of forgetfulness, Marvin made a surprising return. He showed up one Sunday morning with a stack of folders and a box of donuts. "Thought I'd help Pop get his paperwork in order," he said. I was suspicious, but Grandpa smiled. "Let him, Caleb. My eyes ain't what they used to be." So I bit my tongue. Weeks went by. Marvin kept dropping in more often. He'd bring coffee and sit on the porch talking real estate and asset protection. Grandpa would nod politely but look exhausted. I noticed he stopped checking the mail. Marvin offered to handle it. I noticed the locked filing cabinet was left open. Marvin couldn't find the right folder. One day, I showed up and found Marvin alone at the kitchen table, typing on his laptop with a scanner hooked up beside him. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Scanning old photos," he said, without looking up. "Simplifying things." I felt something twist in my gut. Still, I didn't want to create drama. Grandpa trusted him, or at least tolerated him. I figured I was overreacting. Families have quirks. Old men need help. Maybe Marvin was just finally stepping up. But the silence in that house began to thicken. Grandpa wasn't sleeping well. He asked me more than once, "Have you seen the deed lately?" I told him it was probably still in the shed, framed like always. But when I went to check, the frame was empty. Gone. Then came the worst of it. On a foggy Tuesday morning, I pulled up the gravel driveway and saw something that made my stomach drop. A red and white sign staked into the front yard. For sale, prime acreage, call Marvin Warren. I slammed the brakes and ran up the steps. Grandpa was sitting on the porch swing, staring at the sign like it was an alien ship. "What is that?" I demanded. Grandpa shook his head. I don't know. I never signed nothing." Before I could speak, Marvin stepped out the front door, coffee in hand, and that smug customer service smile pasted across his face. "Relax," he said. "It's all legal. He signed it weeks ago. You should have been here more often." He patted Grandpa's shoulder like it was a prop and walked off toward his car. And that's when I saw it. In Grandpa's eyes. A flicker of fear, a crack of confusion, and beneath it all, betrayal. I knew something was deeply wrong, and I wasn't going to let Marvin get away with it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was that damn "for sale" sign, standing like a betrayal in the soil my family had bled into for over a century. And Grandpa, the look on his face haunted me more than anything. He wasn't just confused, he was ashamed, like he'd failed to protect something sacred. The next morning, I made a few calls, first to the county clerk's office. "Yes," the woman said politely. "The property's been transferred to Marvin Warren, finalized 3 weeks ago." I blinked. "What signature was used for the transfer?" She paused. "Walter Warren's, of course." My voice tightened. "Is it possible to see that signature?" She said I'd need to submit a formal request, but the tone in her voice shifted, just slightly, like even she didn't feel good about what she was looking at. By noon, I was back at the farm. Grandpa was sitting on the back porch, a blanket over his legs, sipping sweet tea and staring at the pasture. I sat beside him. "Grandpa, did you really sign the deed over to Marvin?" His eyes stayed on the field. "I don't think I did." "You don't think?" He looked at me then, really looked. "Caleb, I haven't been sleeping right. Things blur together lately. But something about this don't sit right in my bones. I remember him asking about some papers, but I never signed anything official. Nothing I remember, anyway." I felt my jaw clench. This wasn't just some paperwork mix-up. This was theft. And not just any theft. Legacy theft. That evening, I dug out a dusty old box from Grandpa's closet, one filled with old tax documents, handwritten letters, even a faded birth certificate. But the deed? The original one? Gone. All I found was a single black and white copy in a newer folder, stamped with a date from 3 weeks earlier, and a blurry signature that looked off. I drove to town. My friend Tanya worked at a mid-sized law firm downtown. We'd gone to high school together, and though we hadn't spoken in months, I showed up at her office like a man possessed. She barely had time to greet me before I slapped the document down on her desk. "I need help." She scanned the paper, squinting. "This looks scanned in." "Exactly. And the signature?" She leaned closer. "Definitely a digital paste. Someone cut and cleaned this from another form. I'd bet money." That's when the plan started forming in my head. Not revenge, exactly. Not yet. But a vow. A fire lit in my chest. He forged Grandpa's name. He didn't just rob an old man. He tried to bury a family's entire history beneath a bulldozer. I asked Tanya to look deeper. I wanted a full record. Who filed the documents, what email they were submitted from, any metadata she could pull. 2 days later, she called me back. "You're not going to like this," she said. The form was uploaded from a private email, but the document history shows it was printed from a home computer in Marion County. She paused. "Guess who the registered owner is?" I didn't need to. Marvin, I said. Yup. The form was edited 3 times, and all 3 versions came from his machine. Caleb, this wasn't an accident. This was premeditated. I sat in my car outside her office, gripping the steering wheel like it might fly away. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from rage. Not the loud kind, the kind that goes quiet, focused, lethal. I went back to the farm. The for sale sign was still there. Marvin's number printed proudly on the side. I pulled it out of the ground, tossed it into the back of my truck, and stared at the hole it left in the soil. Marvin was about to find out what happens when you try to erase the soul of a Warren man. That night, Grandpa sat at the table across from me. I'd cooked chicken and beans, his favorite, but he barely touched it. You know, he said slowly, I built the barn when I was 17, just me and my father. We didn't have power tools back then, just muscle, sweat, and a vision. I nodded. He looked at me, and his voice cracked just slightly. And now, it's for sale like an old couch. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. It's not sold. Not yet. And it sure as hell won't be without a fight. His eyes met mine, and I saw something shift. Pride, trust, maybe even a flicker of hope. The kind of look a man gives his grandson when he knows the future is in good hands. And in that moment, I made a promise. He could take the papers. He could fake the signature. But he couldn't fake our blood. He couldn't steal what was never his to begin with. And I was going to make sure the whole damn world knew it. I didn't come from a family of liars. Hard-headed men? Sure. Quiet women with eyes that saw everything? Absolutely. But liars? No. We wore our truths like calluses, tough, visible, and earned. And Marvin had spit on all of it. On Grandpa's honesty, on our heritage, on the kind of values that weren't written down, but lived every single day. So I stopped playing nice. The first thing I did was call Tanya back. I need to put together a timeline, I told her. From the day Marvin first came back around, every document, every file, every visit to the courthouse, I want it all. She didn't hesitate. Already ahead of you. Meanwhile, I started pulling photo albums. Not just for me, for proof. The living room became a war room. I laid out decades of family history across the floor. Black and white prints of great-granddad on a tractor, faded Polaroids of Grandpa teaching me how to shoe a horse, 4th of July barbecues, birthdays under the old walnut tree. Generations of sweat, tears, and love captured in curling edges and worn corners. Then I went out to the barn. In the rafters above the feed stall was a rusted old trunk Grandpa had once told me to leave be until it mattered. That day, it mattered. Inside was a ledger. Yellowed pages, handwritten notes, crop records from the 1950s, even receipts for every tractor, fence post, and cow ever purchased. At the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was the original deed, the very one I thought was gone. Signed by my great-great-grandfather in 1903, notarized, embossed, intact, and very much still belonging to Walter Warren. I stood there for a long time, holding it like a sacred relic. Marvin had counted on confusion, on Grandpa's memory slipping, on no one asking questions. But now I had everything I needed, a motive, a forged transfer, and the truth. Still, I didn't want to go straight to the authorities. Not yet. No, this wasn't about paperwork anymore. This was personal. I called Marvin. Hey, it's Caleb, I said, flat voice. He chuckled like we were college buddies. Well, look who finally picked up a phone. Thought you ran off crying. I ignored him. Grandpa's been asking about you. Wants to see you Sunday for supper. You free? There was a long pause. You serious? Yeah. Come by around 5. He's making that meatloaf you like. Damn, Marvin muttered. Okay, sure, I'll be there. He hung up before I could say goodbye. Perfect. I spent the next 3 days building something Marvin would never see coming. I scanned every document, time-stamped every file from Tanya's records, and compiled them into a slideshow. But not just any slideshow. A story. A visual map from trust to betrayal. I included Grandpa's original deed, Marvin's scanned forgery, and even the metadata Tanya had pulled from his email submissions. I built it like a court case, but with heart. Then I printed flyers. Walter's legacy, a family gathering, one last supper at the farm. I sent them out to every neighbor, cousin, family friend, and old churchgoer who had ever stepped foot on that land. Most of them thought it was a goodbye party. I let them believe that. What it really was an ambush with sweet tea and fried chicken. On the night before the gathering, Grandpa asked me why we were hosting such a big event. I smiled and poured him a glass of lemonade. Because some things deserve to be remembered, I said. He nodded slowly. That they do, boy. That they do. But I wasn't just going to make people remember. I was going to make sure Marvin never forgot. Sunday came cloaked in Carolina blue skies and the scent of fresh-cut hay. By 4:30, cars lined the gravel drive, old Fords and dusty Chevys, neighbors in their Sunday best, folding chairs under arms, pie dishes wrapped in foil. Some hadn't been out to the farm in years. Others had grown up playing tag in the corn rows, but every last one of them had a reason to be there. Walter Warren had called. And when Walter called, you showed up. The barn had never looked better. I'd swept every inch, strung soft yellow lights from beam to beam, and laid out 2 long banquet tables covered in mismatched linens and homemade food. A vintage slide projector stood near the hay bales, humming low, waiting. At exactly 5, Marvin's silver SUV pulled up. He stepped out like he owned the place, aviators on, shirt half-buttoned, the kind of smile that made your skin itch. Wow, he said, glancing around. Didn't know we were throwing a damn wedding. I didn't flinch. Just honoring Grandpa. Thought he deserved a proper send-off before you bulldozed his life into a subdivision. Marvin chuckled. Still dramatic, I see. But his laugh faltered when he spotted the crowd, when he saw the projector, when he noticed people nodding politely at him, but no one shaking his hand. The whispers had already started. Over supper, I gave a short toast. Some of you know me, some haven't seen me since I was a kid breaking fence boards. But tonight isn't about me. It's about the man who built everything you see here. I turned to Grandpa, seated proudly in his old rocking chair with a lap quilt and a fresh haircut. This land is Walter Warren. Every tree, every barn plank, every broken shovel handle. He touched it. And tonight, we remember that. The room filled with applause. Marvin clapped too, tentative, unsure. Then I dimmed the lights. The projector flicked on. It started with old photos, black and white, slow fades. Grandpa riding bareback as a boy, Grandma canning peaches, the original barn raising in 1952. A small chorus of soft laughter and teary sighs filled the room. But then the tone shifted, a scan of the original 1903 deed. A zoom on the signature, bold, firm. Then the next slide. Marvin's version. Same layout, same notary seal. But the signature? Lighter, tilted, cropped. Slide after slide, I walked them through it. Calm, steady, like a prosecutor in a courtroom lit by fairy lights and nostalgia. Tanya's digital forensic analysis came next. Metadata, file timestamps, printer logs. Then, the final slide. Uploaded from Marvin's home computer. 3 versions, modified within 12 minutes of each other. The barn went dead silent. Marvin stood slowly, his face drained of color. This is ridiculous, he spat. You're all being manipulated. A neighbor, Mr. Hanley, whose grandfather helped plant the eastern field, rose to his feet. "Are you saying Caleb forged your forgery?" That brought nervous laughter from the crowd. Marvin turned to Grandpa, voice trembling. "Tell them you signed it. You remember, right? I brought you the paper that day. You told me to handle it." Grandpa's hands shook slightly as he gripped the arms of his rocker. "I remember telling you to check the mailbox. I don't remember signing anything, and I sure as hell didn't give you the deed." That was the final crack. You could hear Marvin's confidence collapse in real time. He looked around, waiting for someone to defend him, but no one moved. Instead, I stood, took a deep breath, and delivered the final blow. "I've already submitted all this to the county office. The deed's under review, and Marvin—" I held up a small envelope, sealed and official-looking. "A criminal complaint has been filed." He lunged toward me, but two of my uncles stepped between us. "Don't," one of them warned. Marvin's voice went hoarse. "You think this is over?" I leaned in, low enough so only he could hear. "Oh, it's just getting good. Just—" He stormed out of the barn, kicking gravel as he peeled out into the night, tires screeching, pride shattered. But the best part? He left behind his own business cards, stacked on the for sale sign I'd propped against the back wall. I picked one up and dropped it into the trash. "Wrong soil, Marvin," I muttered. "You never did know how to plant roots." If that moment made you smile even just a little, imagine how Grandpa felt. Justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes, it shows up in a barn full of neighbors. Hit like if you're rooting for Caleb, and drop a comment if someone like Marvin ever crossed your path. In the weeks that followed Marvin's public humiliation at the Harvest Council, something in him shifted, but not in the way one might hope. He didn't apologize. He didn't make amends. Instead, he went quiet. That was the most dangerous part. Abigail knew her father-in-law well enough to sense the storm brewing behind that silence. He was a man who prided himself on appearances, and Caleb had dented the one thing he couldn't tolerate being questioned: his authority. Marvin had lost public face, and for a man like him, that meant war. So Abigail prepared. She started documenting everything: every visit Marvin made to the property, every underhanded comment he dropped, every veiled threat disguised in folksy pleasantries. She kept voice memos, photographs, even asked the postman to confirm the strange mail that had started arriving. Anonymous letters, false accusations about Caleb's character, rumors that he was unstable, unfit to manage the farm. Marvin was planting seeds again, just not in soil. At night, Abigail and Caleb would sit in the kitchen, their backs to the soft hum of the old fridge, a pot of weak coffee between them. They whispered plans like fugitives in their own home. "If he wants a fight," Caleb said one night, jaw clenched, "he'll get one, but not on his terms." Abigail nodded. "We don't just react, we set the tempo." They started reaching out, quietly. First to neighbors Marvin had alienated, then to his former business partners, some of whom had been burned during his more ruthless deals in the 90s. Abigail found an old friend who'd once worked in the county clerk's office. They began digging into land transfers and family trust arrangements, and what they uncovered stunned them. The family land Marvin had claimed was his birthright had in fact been placed in a joint trust decades ago, one co-managed by his now-deceased wife, a trust that, upon her death, should have been transferred equally to both their sons, not just to Marvin. But there was no record of the transfer, no probate documents, no family lawyer ever officially processed the change. In legal terms, it was a gaping hole, and for Marvin, a fatal one. Abigail knew they couldn't take this straight to court. Not yet. Marvin had too many friends in old places, and too much money to stall any case into oblivion. But they could do something else, force it all into the light. So they crafted a plan. Caleb would call for a family mediation, not in secret, not quietly, but publicly, inviting Marvin, his brother, and even some of the older cousins to a formal sit-down at the township's legal aid center, a neutral location, a formal setting, and witnesses. We go in with documents, Abigail said, holding up the folder they'd put together. Facts, history, and receipts. We don't accuse, we illuminate, and let Marvin panic. And they did. Letters were sent, calendars marked, and when the date came, everyone showed up. Everyone except Marvin. The first strike came quietly. Marvin strutted into the community barn meeting that Friday night, slicked back hair and polished boots, as if the town still owed him applause. He didn't notice the extra folding chairs. He didn't notice the sheriff leaning against the far wall. He didn't notice that nobody was offering him a drink or patting his back. But Caleb did. Standing by the hay bales, Caleb gave his grandfather a nod. Howard, in turn, stood and cleared his throat, loud enough to command silence. "I'd like to open tonight's meeting with something different," Howard said, his voice firm but calm. "I've got a recording I'd like you all to hear." The room fell silent. Caleb tapped his phone, and Marvin's voice echoed through the barn. "We raise 'em, we fence 'em, and we charge triple. They don't ask, we don't tell, just like back in Dallas." "We?" another voice asked, Jim's. "You let me use your cattle tags, don't you? That's enough cover." "We're good, Jim, we're real good." A gasp rippled through the room. Jim turned ghost pale. "I never agreed to that," he shouted. Marvin froze. His eyes darted to the sheriff. "That's taken out of context." "I've got the full context right here," Caleb interrupted, pulling out the folder. "Detailed records, forged invoices, fake weight logs, and wire transfers to a shell company registered under Marvin's cousin's name in Oklahoma." Howard stepped closer. "You made this town look like fools. You used your brother's memory to guilt people into trusting you, and then you robbed them blind." Marvin's jaw clenched. "You think this holds up? You think any of this matters?" The sheriff stepped forward now, no longer leaning. "It matters to me. Especially since the Department of Agriculture flagged your herd for unexplained weight discrepancies 2 weeks ago. They've been waiting for someone to say something." "And I just did," Caleb added. "With receipts." Marvin took a step back, but the crowd surged forward, urged. No pitchforks, no torches, just 60 angry neighbors, each one holding their silence like a weapon. He spun toward Jim. You were in on this. You said..." Jim shook his head. "I said you could use my barn for overflow, Marvin. I never signed anything. I've got nothing to do with this. And you dragged me into it." Then came the final blow. From the back of the barn, a voice cut through. "Is that why you sold my dad's property behind my back, too?" It was Lana, Marvin's own niece. She stepped forward, holding a folder of her own. Caleb wasn't the only one doing homework. Marvin's mouth opened, but no sound came. The world closed in. The sheriff laid a firm hand on Marvin's shoulder. "I think you and I need to have a long conversation, in the back of my cruiser." As he was led away, the barn didn't cheer. It didn't need to. The silence said enough. Caleb exhaled slowly. His grandfather gave him a subtle nod, pride, not praise. Lana squeezed his arm. The storm had passed, but the cleanup was just beginning. The weeks following the lawsuit's fallout were quiet, almost unnervingly so. For the first time in months, maybe even years, Evelyn could walk across the land without feeling like she was trespassing on a battleground. The air still held the crisp scent of dry wheat and the steady hum of cicadas. But something had shifted. This land was hers again, truly and finally. After the verdict, a judge issued a restraining order against Craig. The forged deed, which he had so confidently waived in court, was now state evidence in an active investigation. He was facing charges not just for fraud, but for perjury and elder abuse, all felonies. The real estate agent who colluded with him was cooperating to reduce her own sentence, and her testimony had sealed Craig's fate. But Evelyn didn't gloat. Her victories were never about crushing someone. They were about reclaiming something sacred. She took her time restoring the land. The barbed wire Craig had ordered to mark off his acres? Gone. Evelyn hired a small crew of veterans from town to help clear it. She planted young pecan trees where Craig had started prepping for a second barn, and she repaired the old swing that had hung from the oak since she was a girl. The land felt lighter under her feet now, as if even the soil had exhaled. One morning, while raking away debris near the old well, she found an old horseshoe, rusted but still intact. She smiled and tucked it in her pocket, deciding it would hang over the new gate she was building with her niece. For luck, she said, mostly to herself. But she meant something deeper, a quiet symbol of resilience, of all that endured. She also reconnected with people she hadn't spoken to in years. Her cousin Darlene came by with coffee and banana bread one morning, saying softly, "I should have believed you from the start. I'm sorry." Evelyn didn't say much, just poured the coffee and sat beside her. There were wounds that needed time, not words. As for the community, their response was swift and supportive. Donations quietly poured in to help cover her legal fees, and the local paper printed an editorial titled, "Justice Rides a Quiet Horse." Evelyn clipped it out, folded it carefully, and placed it in the family Bible. She also made arrangements for the future. No more vague wills, no more unanswered questions. She revised her estate, set up a trust, and made sure everything was in writing, notarized, and protected. No one was going to steal what her family had bled for ever again. Still, the silence in the house echoed sometimes. There were no more footsteps from her father's old boots, no humming from her mother's kitchen. But when Evelyn stood on the porch and looked out at the restored fields, she didn't feel alone. She had fought for something bigger than herself, and she'd won. In the weeks that followed, the house grew quieter. Not in a sorrowful way, but in a peaceful, relieved silence, the kind that lingers when a long war has finally ended. Madison would sometimes sit by the front window in the mornings with her tea, letting the light warm her skin, no longer flinching at the thought of what used to happen inside these walls. Terry never came back. After the trial, he fled to a distant cousin's house upstate, shunned by the family, and now the subject of both pity and disgust in town. Madison never heard from him again. Not a letter, not an apology, not even a coward's excuse. It was better that way. His silence gave her clarity. Her mother's health remained fragile, but stable. With consistent care and without Terry's bullying, she began smiling again. Little things like humming old songs in the kitchen, or remembering Madison's favorite meals from childhood. It wasn't just a recovery of the body, but of something deeper, dignity, maybe even joy. Madison started volunteering at a local women's shelter, quietly, anonymously at first. She didn't want applause, she wanted purpose. Hearing the stories of other women, some of them trapped by manipulative men like Terry, rekindled her fire. But this time, her rage became fuel for something different. She listened, she mentored, she helped others find exits where they saw only walls. One afternoon, while clearing out her father's old filing cabinet, she found a birthday card he'd never given her. It was dated the year he died, and in his neat handwriting he'd written, "For Maddie, you always saw more than people realized. Keep going, kiddo. You were born with fire." Madison cried, really cried, for the first time in years. Not from pain, but from release. She framed the card and put it on her desk. Every time she doubted herself, every time the world told her to sit down and be quiet, she'd look at that note. It reminded her that even when no one was watching, her strength had mattered. The town eventually stopped whispering. New scandals came and went, but people remembered the trial. They remembered the calm, deliberate way Madison had stood in court and told the truth, not with theatrics, but with power. And that left a mark. Some people thanked her, others avoided her, perhaps out of guilt. Madison didn't need their approval. She had rewritten the rules of her life. On her 39th birthday, she hosted a quiet dinner. Just her mother, a few friends from the shelter, and her neighbor Evelyn, who brought wine and stories. No tension, no masks, no fear. As the candles flickered and laughter filled the room, Madison felt something she hadn't in years: peace. And as she cleared the plates later that night, she glanced at the framed card one more time. She whispered, "I kept going, Dad." And she smiled.